This is Gemara in Kesubos Daf Nun Vav, all the learning for this month. The month of Elul has been generously sponsored as lezchot neshama for Rייzel Bas מאיר, the mother of a very close friend of the Daf. Mir Tashem, the learning of the entire Chabura, learning in the incredible month of Ani L'Daidi L'Daidi Li, where Hashem is so close to us, should bring as the Rייzel Bas Meir to a higher in place in Gan Eden Shalmaila. And we pick it up, and we ran all the way down to the two dots, about 15 lines down. And says the Gemara as we begin a quasi-new topic. Really, it's a continuation a bit from yesterday, in which we're still discussing this machlekes of Lazvan Azariah and the Chachamim with regard to the Tosefes Ksuba. This additional amount of the Ksuba, we had a machlekes in the Mishnah. Tanakama said that the woman collects it always. Rav Elazar ben Azariah said, no, only if they consummated the marriage, only if there was nisuin, does she collect the Tosefes. Today begins the Gemara again, 20 lines down, and Vav Amud Aleph, the two dots. Ba'i Ravin. Ravin asks the following question. Nichnas al chapa v'loi nevala. What happens if they do indeed enter the chapa? They do consummate the marriage. However, v'loi nevala, they do not sleep together. Asks the Gemara Mau, what is the halacha according to Elazar ben Azariah? Does she get the Tosefes Ksuba? And the two sides of the question are, explains the Gemara, Chibas Chopa Kaina or Chibas Bia Kaina. What is the detail? What is the point that determines that Nisuin creates that you get the Tosefes? Is it the act of kinyan? That the Chibas Chopa Kaina, the fact that they went together, they got married, that is the reason why the husband gives the Tosefes? Or no? Or is it the Chibas Bia Kaina, that's only when they finally sleep together, that is when the husband agrees to give the Tosefes to his wife? So explains the Gemara, let's bring a raya, Tashema, the Tanya Rav Yosef learned in a Raisa, Shloikasev law, he does not write the supplemental, the Tosefes, the additional Ksuba, Ella al Chibas Laila Harishain. Explains Rav Yosef that when, for which reason do they write the supplemental Tosefes Ksuba? For the love, the endearment that the first night brings. So proves the Gemara 3 lines on the white lines. If you're going to tell me that it's the act of chuppah, the act of doing this and getting married, I understand then why in the Brisa of Rav Yosef it honed in and it explained that it's the reason, the chiba, the love of that first night. Because that first night is when you do the chuppah. But if it's the act of sleeping together, ask the Gemara, says the Gemara, are they only together on that first night? Or it's explained better, is the first act of intercourse always on the first night? It's not true. Sometimes it doesn't happen to subsequent nights. So explains the Gemara from the fact that Rav Yosef's Brisa said the endearment, the love, the chib of the first night, that shows us that which is the detail that creates this level of endearment that the husband gives the Tosefes, the supplemental ksuba. It is the love of the chapa. Asks the Gemara on the first white line, Belamai chapa. So rather, what are you proving to me? You're proving to me that it's the chapa that happens on that first night. Ask the Gemara a similar question. Chapa b'layla yisab yimama lasa. Who said that chapa is always at night? You could have a chapa by day. Throws the Gemara the ball back. Based on what you're saying, we can prove the same detail that the bia, the first act of intercourse, is as well. Only something by night and not by day? That's not true, explains the Gemara. Ha'amar Rava says, Rava explains famously, we know that in general, la'alacha, we frown upon husband and wife being together in the daytime, in the daylight, I should say more particularly. But Rava teaches us that if it's bebeis Eiffel, that if it's a dark house, in a dark house, then it is allowed for them to be together. So explains the Gemara, in reality, we can have the first act of intercourse by day as well. Explains the Gemara, no, haloi kasha, that's not a question. The Bryce is teaching us the proper way of living, the bia b'layla, that the appropriate time for bia is going to be at night. Ela chuppah kasha. But now we're back to the question of chuppah, that chuppah could for sure be by day. Explains the Gemara, chuppah nami loikash, it's also not a shver, it's also not a question to assume that the chuppah should be by night. Why? Because in general, the chuppah leads to the first act of intercourse. It's teaching us the natural and the correct way of acting, that it's supposed to be at night. And therefore the Gemara proves that it is indeed the chibas chuppah kaina. It is the endearment that is created by them getting married, the consummation, the nisuin, the chuppah. That is what creates the additional obligation of the husband to give the supplemental ksuba to his wife, and not necessarily the actual act of via the actual act of intercourse. But similarly, continues the Gemara, Bayi Ravashi Nichlasa lechuppah ubir sanida. Asks Rashi, what happens if they go to the chuppah? But lo and behold, the woman's a nida. So what's the question? Mao. Based on what we just said, that is the endearment of the chuppah. But what type of chuppah, asked the Gemara? The chazia labia? Is it only chuppah the chazia labia? It's only a chuppah that leads to them being together. But perhaps a chuppah that does not lead to them being together, that does not create this endearment. Or not, or says the Gemara, maybe not. Maybe the act of chuppah itself, even if she's in nida, still creates that endearment. And answers the Gemara, Teiku, we are unsure which level of the chuppah it is that creates the love, the endearment between husband and wife. If it's only a chuppah that can lead to a bia, or even a chuppah of a pir sanida. And we continue in quoting the Mishnah, Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, if one wants to write to Kesuba, he's allowed to write 200, and she writes back, it's as if I already accepted 100. So now we're going to get involved. Is it a possibility that the woman is able to come along, and the woman is able to say, Hiskabalti? What is Hiskabalti? Hiskabalti is the way that in which the wife is saying that it's as if that she already accepted after Kesuba. As we're going to see, the basic form of the Kesuba, and I should say we actually have seen many times, that the root Kesuba, the 200 and the 100, that is a din, that is a takana. We'll see if it's daraisa derabanan. But now the question is, Rav Yehuda the Mishnah taught us that she is allowed to write back, as if I accepted that. So explains the Gemara of Esav Rav Yehuda the Kaisvin Shaiver. It sounds like from the Mishnah, the Rav Yehuda is of the opinion, the Kaisvin Shaiver, that you have to write a receipt. What is a shayver? A shayver is a receipt that any time someone pays a partial obligation, if I owe you $100 and you pay me back $50, we write a shayver, we write a receipt stating that you paid up half of the debt, so that I cannot collect the whole thing. So from the Mishnah, for the factor of Yehuda said that if you want, you could write 200 and she writes back, it's as if I accepted 100. That seems to show that Rav Yehuda is of the opinion that you write a receipt. Asks the Gemara of Atanan, but we learned in the Mishnah, Mishapara mixas chayver Rav Yehuda Eimer Yachlif. Rav Yehuda does not say that what do? You write a receipt. Says Rav Yehuda, no, you exchange. What you do is you give back the original document in which says that the whole debt, and then you write a receipt for that which was paid. So what do we see? You do not write a receipt, but rather you give over the original document and you write a new document for the remaining debt. So we see that Rav Yehuda is not of the opinion that we write a receipt, whereas Rav Yehuda, we do indeed write a receipt, Shaiver. So it asks the Gemara, is Rav Yehuda of the opinion that you write a receipt, which the Mishnah sounds like, but we have a brayso that clearly says, Rav Yehuda says, Yachlif, you exchange it and not that you write a receipt. So Amr Rav Yirmiyah says, Rav Yirmiyah, the first teretz, Gishashay Vrasai Mitaicha. It's true, Rav Yehuda holds in general, we do not write a receipt. But in our case, what are we going to do? We're going to take the original ksuba and we're going to amend the original document. Abaya Amar, says Abaya, no, we can even say it's talking about in which there is no receipt within. You cannot amend the original document. Explains the Gemara, in a regular case of a debt, if I pay up half the debt, then we do not want to have to write a receipt. Why? Because maybe you're going to lose the receipt. And if you lose the receipt that says you paid $50, I can then pull out the shtar that says you owe 100 and collect the whole thing again. And I can collect a second time. So that's the reason why by a regular document there's a large concern. And Rav Yehuda does not want you to write a receipt. Whereas Hacha Vada Yovla Milsa Ba'almahi, over here, she is giving over words. What does that mean? To Amra Leah, remember, that's the case. They're getting married, and the husband has a ksuba in which it states that his wife, that he has to pay his wife $200 in the event of death or divorce. And then the wife says back, this was the whole case of the Mishnah of Rav Yehuda, that the wife says, it's as if I accepted the whole thing. So says the Gemara, in such a scenario, it all began with the words of the woman, meaning that the husband is only here to gain. So if the husband guards the shtar that says his wife paid, then great. And and if he doesn't guard it, he is causing a loss onto himself. Normally, in the case where someone pays up the debt, it's not that he's causing the lender loss, it's the opposite. He's the one that could get messed over. But over here, since it all stemmed from her goodwill, if the husband watches onto that document, great. If not, not. So says the Gemara, I understand we had two terutzim. Abaye answered that even in a case where it's not the shaver inside of it, whereas Rav Yirmiyah said, no, the shaver is inside of it. So says the Gemara, I understand why Abaye doesn't like Rav Yirmiyah. Why? Look at because the Mishnah never said that there's the shaver, there's the receipt ability contained within the document. El Rav Yirmiyah, my time Abaye, but says the Gemara, I don't understand. Why doesn't Rav Yirmiyah hold like Abaye? Explains the Gemara, you know why? We're nervous that if he starts opening up the window and allowing for a case of a shaver, we're afraid that in other cases it could cause a potential loss. So says the Gemara, fine. So period, that's the machlekes of Yirmiyah and Abaye. So now comments the Gemara, Ta'ima the cause of lay, from the Gemara that the Mishnah said, the Rav Yehuda says, the husband writes 200 and the wife writes back a receipt as if she paid part of it. So says the Gemara, Ta'ima the cause of lay. For the Mishnah, it seems that it only works if the wife writes that it's as if she paid half of it. But for the woman to say, Balpeh, for her to declare and say it's as if I paid, it's as if I accepted it, it would not work. And ask the Gemara, why? What is the reason that in the Mishnah that we're seeing that she has to actually write it down? Amai, Davar Shem Mamanu. This should be a case, a classical case of a Davar Shem Mamanu, and it's a monetary matter. And therefore what? In general, as we're about to prove in a moment, any monetary matter we're about to see that the halacha is, someone makes a stipulation, even if it's only made orally, even if it's not actually written down, the halacha is going to dictate that that is a good tanai. And therefore the Gemara's question is, why in our Mishnah did she have to write, it's as if I accepted it? It should be enough if she made this oral declaration. So explains the Gemara, Tanya, what's the proof for this? We're 7 lines to the bottom of the Amud. If someone says to a woman, you're married to me, someone says to a woman, I'm marrying you on condition, I don't have to give you share, clothing, food, I don't have to give you clothing, we don't have to have marital relations. What is the halacha? Which I about to deliver Meir. The marriage is good, but the tanai, the condition is meaningless, says Rav Meir. Rav Yehuda, Meir, no. But davar shemamama tanai kayam. Since the conditions which have to do with money, which is the condition of she'er and ksos, food and clothing, that is going to be a good tanai. It's true that the condition against marital relations will not be, but says Rav Yehuda, the conditions which are monetary conditions would yes work. And now, so ask the Gemara, I don't understand. We see that Rav Yehuda is of the opinion that an oral condition, yes, works by monetary matters. So explains the Gemara, Kesav Rav Yehuda, Kesuva derabanan. You know why? Because Rav Yehuda holds Kesuva is derabanan. Wait, if it's a derabanan, there should be more of a reason to work. Says the Gemara, of course, and this din derabanan has a larger strength than a deraisa. Ask the Gemara, okay, very good, but Hari Peira is derabanan of derabanan chizik. We know that the din of Peira is the din of having to supply the food for the spouse is a din derabanan, ask the Gemara, and yet in such a scenario, we do not find this chizik, and we find that you could, yes, make a stipulation against it. The Tanan, 2 lines on the bottom of the Mishnah review. The says Rav Yehuda, the husband always eats the peiros, the fruit, and the peiros are the peiros, until he writes to her, I have nothing against you or all your properties ad oilam forever. And we turn over to an Nunvavim Beis and explains the Gemara. V'kayim Allah, and what do we hold? My Koisif, says the Gemara, what does it mean that he has to write to his wife? Amar Abaya, Oimer, Koisif means that he said it over to his wife. So ask the Gemara, what do we see? We see there Rav Yehuda, even in a case of a din d'Rabbanan, still allows a Tanai to work. So Amar Abaya explains the Abaya, l'chol yesh ksuba v'lo l'chol yesh peiros. Says Abaya, there's a fundamental difference in ksuba and peiros. Ksuba is something universal that applies to everyone, whereas peiros does not necessarily apply to everyone. And therefore what? And therefore another classical rule. First, we saw on the bottom of Amid Aleph that Dirabanan sometimes are more stringent than Deraisas. Now explains the Gemara, it's not all Dirabanans. It's most of the Shchichas Dirabanans that are common. Then the Rabbanan made this chizik in order to give it strength, but not items which are uncommon. Ask the Gemara based on that rule, Acharei Chamarim. As we're about to see the case of Chamar and the case of donkey drivers, the Shchichi is a common case. And Yav loved the Rabbanan Chizik, and the Rabbanan did not create this Chizik that we spoke about. What's the case? The Tanan Achmir, Achamar, and Shechmusuli, here we have donkey drivers that enter into a city. V'amar Achamim Shali Chadash Achavar Yashan. And one of the donkey drivers says, my produce is Chadash, is not allowed to be eaten, but my friends is Yashan, is yes allowed to be eaten. Explains the Gemara further. Should this here Chadash and Yashan, the way that Rashi learns, just means new and old. Explains the Gemara, or he says, my stuff you can't eat. I didn't take off Chumas and Maisers, but my friends, you can yes eat. He took off Chumas and Maisers. What's the halacha? Ein. These donkey drivers are not, the wagon drivers, donkey, Chamar, are not believed. Whereas Rav Yehuda, Eimer Ne'emanim, they are yes believed. So what do we see? We see that Rav Yehuda allows for believability even in case of Chamarim, which is a common case, and yet we do not find that the Rabbanan were more machmir. Amar Avaya Vadi Divrei Mav Rabbanan Chazik. Says Avaya, of course, anytime it's in the Rabbanan, Chazal made a Chazik, Chazal made it very strong. But Safek Divrei Mav Rabbanan Chazik. This whole case over here, what's the case? What are the donkey drivers testifying about? Whether Chumas and Maises were taken off. That's all a safek. The fact that we assume that Amaratziv don't think of Chumas and Maises is not an absolute din, and therefore that's the reason why they didn't make a chizik in such a case. Rava Amar knows a different reason, but Demai has special kulas. And we continue today's share with 13 lines down, the 2 dots. Rameir Oimer getting into the sheet of Rameir Kol Aboichas Miksuba. What's the halacha said Rameir? You try to detract from the Ksuba, it causes that there is no marriage, and anytime you are together, one is together with their spouse, it's considered a Maisa Zunos. Explains the Gemara Kol Aboichas Afilu Be'Tana'a. For the fact that the Mishnah says anyone that reduces, that sounds, even if it's done through a Tanai, it's done through a stipulation, and as we'll see, even in this case, the stipulation does not work, it's going to be the same thing. Afilu b'tana. Alma, says the Gemara, Kusavar Tanai Batal. Says the Gemara, what do we see? We see that Rameir must hold that the Tanai is Batal. Ve'isla, and therefore she's still entitled to get the regular ksuba. V'kivan the Amar lo laslach elamana, and since he says to his wife, you only get a mana, not 200, you only get 100. Therefore, lo isamcha daita. His wife is not saymich das. His wife does not feel that she's going to get a regular ksuba, and because the wife is not saymich das, avalei bilas avilas nos. It's tantamount to a case of woman not having a ksuba at all, and therefore anytime they're together, it's considered a bilas nos. Ask the Gemara, says the Gemara, don't understand. If you make a stipulation prior to the Torah, it's going to be batal. But if you made a stipulation against the Rabbanon, the Tanai works. So ask the Gemara that we think right now the Kesubos is only din derabanan. So according to Meir, the Tanai shall work. Explains the Gemara, Kesavar Meir, Kesuba de'araisa. Meir is of the opinion that all the Kesuba is deraisa. And because Kesuba is deraisa, therefore, any Tanai, any stipulation you make, Kineged opposite the Kesuba is going against the Torah, and therefore it's going to be batal. And that's why Meir says that it's considered a Maisa Zinos. We continue with this exact halacha, or about 25 lines to the bottom of the two dots. Tanya, we learned in a Raiser Meir Oimer. The first opinion is like we just quoted, Meir holds that anytime they're together, it's considered zinos. Rav Yossi Oimer Rashai says Rav Yossi, no, they're allowed to make such a stipulation. Rav Yehuda Oimer Raza Kaisel B'Sula Shtar Shel Masayim. What could you do? He could write to her a 200 zuz, $200. And she responds, his kabalti mimcha mana lamana mana v'izkoizav lach la his kabalti mimcha chamishim zuz. That is how Rav Yehuda says you could circumvent part of the ksuba by she writing. She already accepted it. V'savar Rav Yossi. So that's opinion number 2. Opinion number 3 is Rav Yossi. Excuse me. Ask the Gemara, we just quoted the 3 opinions. We just quoted Rav Meir, we just quoted Rav Yossi, we just quoted Rav Yehuda. So ask the Gemara, V'savar Rav Yossi Rashai, is the opinion that you just quoted of Rav Yossi, in which Rav Yossi says he's allowed to reduce the ksuba. Is that accurate? Ramini, I'll ask you a contradiction. Says the Braisa, you're not allowed to use the metalton movable items to pay for the ksuba. Amar Rav Yossi, and on this Rav Yossi explains, what is the tikkun olam? What is, how are you helping society? It says Rav Yossi, movables always change in value. So that is the reason why Rav Yossi takes issue with this thing. We conclude today's shir that says the Gemara. First of all, one second. Tanakama, nami noisik kamar. There's a machlekes seemingly between Tanakama and Rav Yossi, but they both seem to be saying the same thing of ein oisin. Elalav explains the Gemara, Ari Kamer. Bemed, Varmamurim, B'Shalai Kibul of Achrayis. Explains the Gemara, when is this referring to? It's referring to when the husband, when is he not allowed to use metalton to pay for the ksuba? Only when he does not accept responsibility for these movable items if they get stolen or lost. Kibul of Achrayis, Oisin, then he would, yes, be able to use the metalton to pay for the ksuba. And on this, Rav Yossi, the Meir, Kibul of Achrayis, Amay Oisin. Even if he accepted a chayis, why could he go with Avala in Kaisin and Baichsin? Yes, Rav Yossi, movable items are not fixed in value. They could always appreciate and depreciate. That is Shita Rav Yossi. Hashto ma'asam the dilma bachsi chayish. If we see that he's chayshish, they might go down in value, Rav Yossi. Certainly in our case, which we know that they went down in value, we know that they're trying to write less than a 200 mana ksuba. Certainly Rav Yossi would hold that's not a good, that's going to be a problem. Ask the Gemara, 2 lines to the bottom, over there, in the case of metalton, she doesn't know that the value is going down, so she can't be meichel. But in our case, she can yes be meichel, and that is how we conclude differentiating between the 2 cases. We'll pick it up from the Achtei D'Ramir Chamba on the next year, Mir Tzah Hashem.